I never saw it coming. How could I? We were sitting at the dinner table, winding down after a long day. My 42-year-old wife, Sarah, looks me straight in the eye and casually tells me she's going out to dinner with a colleague. Now, I get it. Dinner with a colleague sounds innocent enough, right? But let's be real. This wasn't just a friendly dinner. It was a date. A full-on date with a guy she works with, and she said it like it was no big deal. Let me give you some background. Sarah and I got married when she was 22. We were young, clueless, and expecting a baby. We didn't really know what we were getting into, but like many young couples, we went through with it. Looking back, people in their 20s today seem to have it all figured out compared to how we were back then. But at the time, it felt like the right thing to do. And honestly, it wasn't all bad. There were some good years, especially early on. After we got married, I started investing. I've always been good with numbers, and I built a successful business from it. We became well off, more than comfortable really. I gave Sarah and our family a life a lot of people would envy, but no amount of money could fix what came next. We had a son, our pride and joy, but he was born sick, real sick. And let me tell you, there's nothing worse than watching your child suffer and knowing that despite all the money, all the doctors, all the treatments, you can't save him. That kind of helplessness stays with you, haunts you. Our son passed away after years of battling his illness. And Sarah, well, Sarah changed. She withdrew. I get it, grief is that to people, but she didn't just shut down. She shut me out. Completely. We were still married on paper, but emotionally, physically, we might as well have been strangers sharing the same space. I tried everything I could think of, therapy, vacations, time off work, anything to get her back, but nothing worked. For years, she was like a ghost living in our house, unreachable. It took psychologists a long time to get her to open up even a little. Things improved after a while, but not by much. She wasn't the same, and I wasn't sure she'd ever be again. So, fast forward to that night at the dinner table. She drops the bombshell. She's going out with this guy from work, and she acted like it was no big deal. He's just a friend, she said. He's been really supportive, and I just need someone to talk to. You right? I wasn't fooled. This wasn't just about talking. She said he made her feel better and gave her energy. At that moment, I didn't know how to react. My mind went blank. How do you respond when your wife tells you she's going on a date with another man? I didn't want to blow up or start a fight, so I just got up and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't even grab my keys or my phone. I just left, and she ran after me. I'll never forget how desperate her voice sounded, like she knew she had gone too far. Her footsteps hurried behind me. It's not like that. Please just listen. But I didn't want to listen. I mean, what was she going to say that could possibly justify this? That it wasn't a betrayal? That this was somehow normal? She begged me to believe her. She said it wasn't cheating. She told me that he was just a colleague and that I was making this out to be worse than it really was. But then she threw in the kicker. He's helped me feel alive again, she said. You don't understand how much I've needed this. Needed what exactly? A dinner? A man who's not me? I was too angry to respond. But one thing was crystal clear. If I told her not to go, she'd still go. I know her. Sarah's the type of woman who always gets what she wants, no matter the cost. The problem is she never seems to think about how high the price might be. I needed to figure out what to do next. I wasn't going to just let this slide. No way. I put up with a lot from her over the years, but this was too much. I needed proof of what she was doing. So I called a friend who knows people who can find out everything about someone's life. I told him what was going on, and he connected me with a private investigator. I wanted to know everything. Who this guy was, how he lived, and what he wanted. I wanted to know where they went, what they talked about, and what they did. And yes, I wanted pictures. I wanted to see them together, because deep down, I knew this was more than just dinner. I could feel it in my gut. Something was off. I wasn't going to sit back and let my life fall apart without knowing what was happening behind my back. So I let the investigator do his job while I waited to find out who this guy was and what my wife was really up to. And yeah, I know you're wondering why I didn't just confront her right then and there. Well, I've learned over the years that sometimes you've got to be patient. Let the truth come to you. And when it does, you hit back hard. But for now, I waited, and that, my friends, is where it all started. The detective didn't waste any time. A few days after I gave him the green light, he came back with the first bit of intel on this guy, Bob. Yeah, his name was Bob. It's always some guy with a boring, regular name, isn't it? But don't let that fool you. Bob wasn't just some nobody. He had a family, 2 kids, a wife, a decent job. The guy lived in a nice house, one of those big suburban places with a white fence and probably a dog in the yard. A picture-perfect life. But we all know appearances can be deceiving. I was determined to find out what he was hiding. The detective didn't just give me the basics. He dug deep. I got everything. Bob's home address, where his kids went to school, what his wife did for work, and even what kind of car he drove. It was like a file on a guy who was supposedly so supportive of my wife that she felt the need to dress up and go out with him. I stared at his photo for a long time. He looked like a regular middle-aged guy who'd rather be watching sports than sneaking around with another man's wife. But I knew looks can be misleading, and I wasn't taking any chances. I realized Sarah wasn't telling me the whole story, and I wasn't going to wait for her to come clean. So I started planning. With the kind of money I have, I can make things happen. Big things. And I didn't care about the cost. This was about my pride, about finding out the truth and getting my revenge. My next move? Well, it required a certain type of person, and I knew just who to talk to about that. I reached out to an old friend. This guy, let's call him Mike, had connections in all the right places, if you know what I mean. He owed me a few favors from way back. And when I told him what was going on, he didn't hesitate. He got in touch with someone almost immediately. This girl, well, let's just say she was exactly what I needed. She was young, 27, maybe 28 at most. Blonde, with legs for days and a face that would make any man do a double take. The kind of woman who could make someone like Bob forget all about his nice little family in the suburbs. When Mike showed me her picture, I didn't even have to think about it. I gave the go-ahead right away. She was perfect. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. You probably have a pretty good idea what this girl does for a living, but I'm not going to spell it out here. I know how Reddit works, and I'm not about to get this post flagged for inappropriate content. Let's just say she was very professional and leave it at that. With her on board, the plan was really coming together. But I wasn't going to stop at just setting Bob up. No, I wanted to cover all my bases. That's why I also put a guy on him tail. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. I wanted to know what Bob was doing when he wasn't with her, how he spent his time, who else he might be seeing. I needed a full picture, not just some half-assed snapshot of a single date. The private investigator was still digging up dirt, and I had the girl ready to make her move. I was confident that everything would play out just how I wanted. Bob would slip up guys like him always do, and when he did, I'd be right there to catch him in the act with all the evidence I needed. But then, out of nowhere, everything almost fell apart. It was the day before Sarah's supposed date with Bob when she dropped a bomb on me. We were sitting in the kitchen, and I was trying to act normal, pretending I wasn't planning anything behind the scenes. She looked up from her phone and casually said, "I've been thinking. I'm not going to meet Bob tomorrow after all." For a moment, I couldn't even understand what she was saying. She wasn't going? After all the effort I'd put into this? After I had everything set up to catch her, and Bob red-handed? What the hell was going on? I forced myself to stay calm. "Oh," I asked, pretending to be nonchalant about it. "Why not?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I just changed my mind. I don't think it's appropriate. Instead, I'm going to meet up with a friend. We're going to grab dinner at that new restaurant downtown." I stared at her, my mind racing. Something about this didn't sit right with me. Sure, maybe she had changed her mind about Bob. Maybe she realized how fucked up it would be to actually go through with it. But something about the way she said it felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than she was letting on. And when Sarah said she was meeting a friend, I had to wonder if this friend was someone else entirely. Was it still Bob? Or was there another guy involved? I knew better than to press her about it. If I showed too much interest, she'd get suspicious. So I nodded and acted like I was okay with her decision. But deep down, I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. No, the plan was still on. I wasn't going to cancel the private investigator just because Sarah changed her mind. Whatever she was up to with Bob or someone else, I was going to find out. She could change her story all she wanted, but I had too much at stake now. So I sat back, pretending everything was fine, while secretly making sure my plan moved forward. I was determined to catch her. One way or another, Sarah was going to slip up, and when she did, I'd be ready. My gut had been right all along. Sarah was still planning to go on that date with Bob. It didn't matter what she had told me in the kitchen. Her actions spoke louder than her words. The detective confirmed it for me when he sent over the latest update. She had booked a table for two at a nice restaurant, the kind of place we used to go to when things were good between us. But that wasn't the worst part. She also rented a hotel room. And not just any room, a room that cost $400 a night. The kind of room you don't just rent to talk. I knew what was going on. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. Dinner, drinks, and then a night in that expensive hotel with Bob. I could feel my blood boiling just thinking about it. But I had to stay focused. This wasn't the time to lose my cool. I had to act, and I had to act smart. First things first, I assigned one of the two detectives to watch Bob's house. I needed to know if Bob's wife was going to be home while my wife was out screwing around with him. It was all part of the plan, and everything had to be timed just right. The goal wasn't just to catch Sarah and Bob together. I wanted to ruin his life too. So we waited. That was the hardest part, waiting. Knowing what was happening and what was about to happen, but having to hold back until the right moment to act. Then the first piece of evidence arrived, a photo. It showed Sarah sitting at a table with Bob, looking cozy, like she didn't have a husband waiting for her at home. But that wasn't what really upset me. No, what really made my blood boil was the second photo that followed. It showed them kissing, right there in the middle of the restaurant, like they didn't have a care in the world. Like everything they were doing was perfectly normal. I wanted to lose it. I wanted to punch a hole in the wall, smash something, anything, but I had to keep my head straight. This was just the beginning. I knew they wouldn't stop at the restaurant. The hotel room was waiting, and I had no doubt they were headed there next. But before they could get there, I had another move to make. I called the detective who was stationed outside Bob's house. "Is she home?" I asked, referring to Bob's wife. "Yeah, she's home," he confirmed. "Perfect. That was all I needed." I sent the detective the photo of Bob and Sarah kissing, along with some very specific instructions. I'll never forget the rush of satisfaction I felt when I imagined how this was going to play out. The detective knocked on the door, and when Bob's wife answered, she was probably expecting something routine. But what she got was anything but. The detective was direct. He asked her if she knew where her husband was. She said she didn't, of course. Bob had told her he'd be working late, just like he usually did when he was sneaking around. When the detective asked her again, she started to get nervous. I could picture her panicking, thinking something bad had happened to him. But the detective calmed her down. "No, he's fine," he said, "but I think you should see this." He handed her the photo of Bob kissing Sarah, and I can only imagine the shock on her face. Her world probably started crumbling right there on the doorstep. She stammered something about how Bob was supposed to be at work, that he'd said he'd be home late. But the detective cut her off, calmly letting her know that her husband wasn't working late. He was on a date. I knew exactly what would happen next. As soon as the detective walked away, Bob's wife would be dialing his number, screaming into the phone, demanding answers. And when he saw her name pop up, I bet Bob's heart would skip a beat. He'd make up some excuse, try to calm her down, but she wouldn't be having any of it. No, she'd be in full panic mode. And just like I expected, Bob would rush home, desperate to salvage whatever he could of his mess of a life. While that shitstorm was brewing on Bob's end, I was sitting at home, waiting for Sarah to come back. I had her picture in my hand, the one of her kissing Bob, and I'll tell you what, that was the last time I'd ever feel anything for her again. That image was burned into my brain, and whatever love or respect I still had for her was long gone. But that wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. I had more on my sleeve. This wasn't just about catching her in the act or humiliating Bob. No, this was about completely dismantling everything. While I waited for Sarah, I was finalizing the next part of my plan. Sarah thought she was being clever and could get away with this, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I had spent years building my business, making connections, and learning how to take control of situations. To me, this was just another problem to solve. When I was done, she and Bob would regret every choice that brought them to that dinner. The moment for revenge was finally close. I had been patient, watching everything happen, and now it was time to act. Do you remember that stunning blonde I mentioned? The one with beautiful hair and legs that seemed endless? Well, if you didn't pick up on it before, let me make it clearer now. She wasn't just some random girl I met. No, she was the tool I needed to set the final piece of my plan in motion. You might have guessed what her profession was, but I'll keep it vague here for obvious reasons. When Sarah left for her date, the blonde was already at my house waiting. She looked even better in person, dressed in this sleek, tight dress that left little to the imagination. We sat down, shared a few glasses of wine. To be honest, I needed the wine more than she did. I was on edge. Not from nerves exactly, but from the anticipation. The knowledge of what I was about to do weighed on me. It's not every day you plan to cheat on your wife, even if it's for revenge. But then again, was this even cheating? Could it be called that when she had already blown up our marriage with Bob? It didn't feel like betrayal, not on my part. This was payback. After a couple more glasses, we headed upstairs. Now let me make one thing clear. There was nothing romantic about what happened next. This wasn't passion, love, or even lust. It was just a task that needed to be done to finish what Sarah had started. The blonde girl was skilled, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't focused on her, or even really on Sarah at that moment. It felt more like going through the motions. When we had sex, it felt more like checking off a box than anything else. There was no emotion, no satisfaction. I wasn't there for the pleasure. This was business. I remember lying there, going through the process, and all I could think about was how Sarah would react when she walked through that door. The shock on her face when she saw me in bed with another woman. That was what I was waiting for. That was the only part of this that mattered. And sure enough, right on schedule, the front door opened. I heard it creak, followed by her footsteps echoing through the hallway. We didn't stop. I didn't pause, didn't hesitate. I wanted her to walk in on it. I wanted her to see it all. When Sarah finally stepped into the room and saw us, her scream was immediate. She screamed like she had just walked into the middle of a crime scene. And maybe she had. She froze in the doorway, her eyes wide, her face pale, completely stunned by what she was witnessing. It was like everything in her world was crumbling around her in real time, and she couldn't process it. The blonde didn't linger. She got dressed so quickly, you'd think she had been preparing for this exact scenario her whole life. She didn't say a word, didn't even look back as she slipped out of the room and out the front door, leaving Sarah and me alone to deal with the fallout. Then Sarah exploded. I had seen her angry before, but this was different. It was like she had completely lost control. She screamed at me, saying I was betraying her and causing our marriage to fall apart. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Here she was, yelling at me as if she hadn't just been out with Bob, booking hotel rooms, and acting like his mistress. I let her scream for a while, just watching her lose it. She was pacing, throwing her hands up, cursing and calling me names. I stood there, waiting for her to calm down. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo of her and Bob kissing in the restaurant. The one she thought no one would ever see. I know about the hotel, I said calmly, holding the phone up to her face so she could see the proof. The one you rented for tonight. The one you thought you'd be spending the night in with Bob. Her expression changed instantly. Gone was the anger, the righteous indignation. It was replaced by shock, maybe even a little fear. She stammered something, tried to explain herself, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. You're staying there tonight, I said, my voice cold. That room isn't going to waste. For a second, she didn't say anything. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to salvage this, how to turn it around, and make herself the victim. But she couldn't. Not this time. She was caught, and she knew it. She tried to fight back to throw more blame my way. How could you do this? She screamed, her voice shaking. After everything we've been through, you're the one who's cheating now? How can you live with yourself? I just shook my head. You think I'm the one to blame? I asked, shocked. You went out with another man. You rented a hotel room to sleep with him. Don't act like you're innocent in all this. She kept trying to argue, making it seem like what I did was worse than what she had been doing for who knows how long. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I stood my ground, kept my voice level, and told her how it was. I told her that this was her fault, that everything that had happened, from her emotional distance to her affair with Bob, had led us to this exact moment. Eventually, she gave up. She grabbed her purse, fumbled for her phone, and called a taxi. I didn't stop her. I just watched her pack up her things, knowing she was going to that hotel room she had rented for Bob. Only now, she'd be spending the night there alone. When the door finally slammed shut behind her, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief. Just a cold, empty space where our life together used to be. Sure, the revenge was satisfying in a way, but it didn't fill the void she had left in our marriage. It didn't fix anything. All it did was bring everything to its inevitable end. But this wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. The next part of my plan? That was already in motion. And when it was done, Sarah wouldn't just be humiliated. She'd be destroyed. Filing for divorce was the last step I needed to take. After everything that happened, the lies, the cheating, the betrayal, it was the only choice that made sense. I didn't want to try to fix things anymore. I didn't care about her excuses, her tears, or her attempts to change what had happened. To me, our marriage ended the moment she went out with Bob. The rest was just a formality. I didn't waste any time. I hired the best lawyers I could find. No shortcuts, no half measures. These guys were sharks, the kind of attorneys who didn't just win cases. They annihilated the opposition. I knew I was in good hands. We sat down, went over everything, and I laid out exactly what I wanted. I wanted her out of my life for good, and I wanted to make sure she walked away with as little as possible. This wasn't about being fair. This was about making sure she paid the price for everything she had done. And trust me, I had the resources to make sure that happened. The first thing I did was block her on my phone. I didn't want to hear from her, didn't want to read her texts, didn't want to listen to her voicemails. Every possible method of communication blocked. If she needed to reach me, she'd have to do it through the lawyers. There was nothing left to say anyway. The moment she left for that hotel, any last shred of care or concern I had for her vanished. We were done. The divorce process, as expected, took time. A lot of time. These things never go quickly, especially when there's money involved. And we had a lot of it to fight over. The house, the assets, the business, it was all on the table. At first, Sarah tried to be tough. She thought she deserved half of everything and could leave our marriage with a lot of money. But she underestimated me. She didn't realize how far I would go to make sure she only got what she truly deserved. We went through court dates, meetings with lawyers, and all the messy steps of the process. And you know what? We never talked. Every time we saw each other in the courtroom, we didn't say a word and barely looked at each other. I glance over and see her sitting there, trying to look composed, but I could tell she was cracking. She was unraveling under the pressure. This wasn't the Sarah I had married. This was a woman desperately trying to hold on to whatever she could, but she was slipping and she knew it. My lawyers were relentless. They tore her apart in every negotiation, every hearing. They found every loophole, every clause in our prenup, every bit of financial evidence that worked in my favor. And, of course, the photos of her with Bob, those were the final blow. The evidence of her infidelity was ironclad. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't spin it. She was caught, and the court saw it for what it was her fault. Her affair, her destruction of our marriage. The process dragged on for months. At times it felt like it would never end, but I was patient. I wasn't in a rush. Each day, I felt we were getting closer to the end, and I knew I was winning. I could see it on Sarah's face. She looked defeated and humiliated. She went from fighting me hard to barely showing up to the hearings. Deep down, I think she knew there was no escape for her this time. Finally, after what felt like a long wait, the day came when it was all over. The judge announced the final decision, and it was exactly what I wanted. I walked away with almost everything: the house, the business, and most of our assets. Sarah was left with very little, a small settlement that wouldn't last her more than a few months. She tried to argue for more, tried to claim that she needed support, but the evidence was against her. The court sided with me on every major point. It was over. I'll never forget the look on her face when the final ruling was read. It was a mix of disbelief, anger, and something else. Maybe regret? I don't know. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had won. I had taken everything from her, just like she had tried to take everything from me. And she was left with almost nothing. As we left the courtroom that last day, I didn't say a word to her. There was nothing left to say. We were done. Finally, completely done. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, and I haven't looked back since. But the truth is, even with all of this behind me, there's no real satisfaction. Sure, I took almost everything from her. Sure, she's out of my life. But there's no victory in this. There's no feeling of victory. What's left is just the emptiness after a marriage that should have ended long ago. I won the battle, but the whole experience was terrible, and no one comes out of it unscathed. It's strange to look back at all the chaos, the lies, the betrayal, the divorce, and realize it's finally over. For a long time, I thought I'd never reach this point, like the mess Sarah made would haunt me forever. But here I am, standing, living, and moving forward. The first few months after the divorce were rough. Not gonna lie, I thought that once everything was settled, I'd feel some kind of relief. I thought maybe winning, taking everything from her, would make me feel whole again. But the truth is, nothing really prepares you for the aftermath. You can't just switch off the years of history, the emotional scars, and the weight of it all. There's no magic moment where everything goes back to normal. You have to rebuild. And rebuilding? That takes time. I had to relearn who I was outside of my marriage, outside of the anger and revenge. For so long, everything had been about her, about catching her, exposing her, and getting back at her. Once that was over, I had to figure out what was left of me. I threw myself into my work, expanded my business even further. I poured all my focus into it, and it paid off. The company is thriving, better than ever, and financially. I'm in a great place. Money never solves all your problems, but I'll be honest, it makes things a hell of a lot easier when you're trying to rebuild your life. Therapy helped too. I didn't want to admit it at first, didn't want to sit in front of some stranger and spill my guts. But it worked. I learned how to let go of some of my anger and bitterness. If you hold on to those feelings for too long, they can really hurt you. It took time though. It wasn't an overnight change. It was more like slowly breaking down a wall, piece by piece, until I could see what was on the other side. I started taking better care of myself, both physically and mentally. I got back into working out, ate healthier, and made time for things I enjoy. I rediscovered hobbies that had nothing to do with Sarah or our marriage. It helped me build a life that felt like mine again, not just something left over from our past. But when it comes to relationships, that's a different story. I'm not looking for anything. I've learned that some things in life just aren't for me, and relationships might be one of those things. I don't trust the idea of love anymore, not in the way I used to. After everything I've been through, it's hard to imagine letting anyone get that close again, giving someone that kind of power over me. I know people say you should never let one bad experience define you. But this wasn't just one bad experience. This was my whole world, and it collapsed. And honestly, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with being on my own. Some people think you need someone else to feel complete or make life meaningful. But I've realized that's not true. You can be whole on your own. You can find peace, happiness, and satisfaction without needing someone by your side. I don't need a relationship to feel like my life has purpose. Right now, I'm focusing on myself, my work, my health, and my future. I travel when I want, spend time with friends, and live without any drama holding me back. It's simple, quiet, and exactly what I need. Will I ever change my mind? Maybe. Who knows what the future holds? But for now, I'm done with love and relationships. I've learned that sometimes the only person you can really rely on is yourself, and that's enough for me. I'm doing well, better than I have in years. If that means staying single and focused on myself, then that's fine. I've earned this peace, and I'm not going to give it up for anyone anymore. Second story. I, 32 female, married my husband, 35 male, a year ago. We've been together for almost 5 years and have a child together. Recently, I found one of his old phones and jokingly told him I was going to check his messages. He said he didn't mind because he had nothing to hide. At first, I didn't actually want to look, but then I got curious. I discovered that he had been messaging a few women after we started dating. One woman, he referred to as just a friend, claimed he was only helping her out while I was in a tough situation. He even tried to go on dinner dates with 2 other women while we had been together for over a year and a half. I'm not sure if he actually went through with it or if he was just joking, but I'm really hurt. How do I bring this up to him? I don't want to start a fight, but I see this as cheating. I feel lost right now and need help. What should I do?